It wasn't grief alone that filled the room. It was the sense that America itself was on trial. The Memorial Hall stood draped in flags, each one rippling slightly from the air vents overhead, their colors heavy with history. Rows of folding chairs lined the floor, packed with mourners, journalists, and political operatives who seemed to have come not only to remember a man, but to measure a movement. The silence was thick. It's fractured only by the faint snap of cameras and the rustle of paper programs clutched in nervous hands. Asterisk. Charlie Kirk's portrait loomed above the podium, his image framed in black cloth and dim light. For some, it was a reminder of his firebrand energy, the rallies, the headlines, the controversies that made him impossible to ignore. For others, it was a symbol of a fractured political generation, torn between faith and ambition, unity and division. And in this hall, that tension was about to boil into something unforgettable. Asterisk, the crowd waited, expectant, restless. Veterans in uniform sat shoulder to shoulder with college students in Turning Point t-shirts. Reporters scribbled, television crews adjusted their angles, and even the whispers carried an edge of anticipation. The air seemed charged, as though everyone knew this wasn't just a memorial, it was theater, it was trial, it was prophecy. Asterisk, then the moment arrived. From the side entrance, 3 figures emerged together, stepping into the light of the stage. Marco Rubio, polished and composed, eyes darting as if measuring the optics of every step. Pete Hegseth, jaw set, shoulders squared, exuding a soldier's defiance, as though ready to turn grief into a call to arms. And then TulsiGabbard.com/steady, her presence quiet yet commanding. The kind of presence that doesn't ask for attention, but draws it nonetheless. Asterisk, the applause was uneven, some clapping enthusiastically, others hesitating, uncertain of what to expect. Rubio offered a tight smile. Hegseth, a solemn nod. Tulsi, a moment of silence longer than the rest, a silence that seemed to settle the room more than any words could. Asterisk. As they reached the podium, the cameras clicked furiously, capturing every expression, every hesitation, every signal of what was to come. And in that electric pause before the first words were spoken, the question wasn't who would honor Charlie Kirk best, it was who would reveal the true character of themselves. Asterisk. But no one expected who would speak from the heart. And who would play politics? Charlie Kirk had never been a man content with silence. His voice had thundered across college campuses, echoed through viral clips, and carved its way into the national conversation like a blade against stone. To some, he was the sharp edge of a new conservative awakening. To others, he was the very reason they feared that politics had slipped into something raw, unbridled, and merciless. But whatever one believed, no one could deny that his influence was real. He had built an empire of young followers who waved flags, filled stadiums, and claimed their place in the storm of America's cultural battles. Asterisk now. As his portrait gazed down from the stage, the Memorial Hall became more than a sanctuary of mourning. It became an arena of destiny. Every chair, every face in the crowd, carried a weight beyond grief. They were not only honoring a fallen figure, they were measuring the shape of the movement he left behind. Was it a future of unity or a fracture? Was it a chance to elevate dignity or to double down on division? Asterisk, Rubio knew it. Hegseth knew it. And Tulsi, perhaps most of all, understood that this wasn't about simply speaking into a microphone. It was about claiming the soul of an audience still raw with emotion, still searching for direction. Each word would ripple out of this hall, into headlines, into hashtags, into the memories of a generation who had grown up with Charlie Kirk's voice defining their sense of identity. Asterisk. Reporters scribbled notes furiously. But what they were really waiting for was a soundbite. Television crews didn't want eulogies. They wanted fireworks. And the people seated in those rows, college kids with smartphones, veterans with medals, church leaders with folded programs in their laps, they too were waiting, not for safe platitudes, but for a declaration. Something that would make them stand taller, nod harder, believe again that their fight had meaning. Asterisk, the atmosphere thickened with expectation. The stakes stretched beyond Charlie Kirk himself. His absence created a vacuum, and vacuums in politics never stay empty for long. Whoever filled it would shape how his name was remembered and how the movement itself was carried forward. Would it be hijacked for ambition, reduced to sound bites and opportunism? Or would it be honored with courage, with clarity, with something that spoke to the heart instead of to the polls? Every detail of the room seemed to lean into that tension. The cameras panned, catching Rubio's tightened jaw, Hegseth's clenched fists, Tulsi's closed eyes as if she were centering herself before battle. The audience shifted in their seats, some leaning forward as though sensing that history itself was pressing against the walls. And still silence. The pause before the first words, a pause that stretched long enough to feel unbearable, yet necessary. Long enough for everyone to realize that they weren't just waiting for speeches, they were waiting for verdicts. On Kirk, on the movement, on America. Because this was never just about one man. This was about the crossroads his death illuminated, the path toward a politics of dignity, or to the temptation of performance and power. And whichever way the words fell from that podium, they would be replayed, dissected, and remembered. The next words would not just honor a man, but ignite a national firestorm. Marco Rubio had always known how to navigate a stage. From his earliest campaigns in Florida to the heated presidential debates that once thrust him into the national spotlight, his strength was not spontaneity, but polish. Every gesture measured, every phrase rehearsed, every smile designed to land with just enough warmth to feel human, just enough calculation to serve his ambition. He was the archetype of the modern politician, smooth, articulate, practiced at the art of saying much while committing too little. For years. Rubio's brand had been faith-laden language wrapped around establishment instincts. He could quote scripture with conviction, invoking images of prayer and morality while quietly aligning himself with donors, insiders, and the machinery of Washington power. To his supporters, this balance made him trustworthy, a man of God who could also get things done. To his critics, it revealed a hollowness, words about conviction without the courage to risk anything for them. And in the tension of this memorial, that contradiction was about to be laid bare. As he approached the podium, Rubio's mind ticked through his script. He would speak of loss, of service, of Charlie Kirk's passion for youth and country. He would lace his sentences with words like faith, family, and freedom carefully, chosen to resonate with the conservative base. He would deliver his speech with the cadence of a man grieving, but not too much the balance of solemnity and statesmanship. Because for Rubio, this was more than a eulogy. It was an opportunity. The cameras loved him. They always had. His boyish face, still remarkably unchanged despite years in the Senate, carried the same telegenic quality that first propelled him forward. He knew how to tilt his head at the right moment, how to pause for applause, how to appear vulnerable without ever surrendering control. On the surface, this was everything an audience could want in a speaker at a memorial. And yet, beneath the sheen, the cracks were already showing. He spoke of Kirk as though reading a resume. Charlie was a fighter, he declared, his voice carrying easily across the room. He believed in the promise of America. He dedicated his life to empowering young people, to giving them a voice. The words were strong, but the delivery carried the faint metallic ring of performance. It was as though Rubio were speaking less to the mourners in the room than to the headlines he hoped would follow. Some nodded along politely, appreciating the familiarity of his cadence, but others shifted uneasily, sensing the distance between grief and ambition. Veterans in the audience, men and women who had buried comrades, knew what raw remembrance sounded like. Students who had followed Kirk's rise knew the fire that had driven him. Rubio's words, however eloquent, felt like polished stones, smooth, presentable, but hollow at the core. He tried to bridge the gap with scripture. As the book of Romans reminds us, he intoned, "We glory in our sufferings, because suffering produces perseverance. Perseverance, character. And character, hope." It was a powerful passage, and for a moment, The hall seemed to soften. But then came the pivot, the seamless shift from scripture to politics. Rubio began to weave Charlie Kirk's name into the fabric of the conservative movement, framing his life less as a personal journey and more as a banner for the cause. He spoke of the fight against the left, of preserving the America we know, of never surrendering to forces that would tear us apart. It was the old Rubio playbook, faith to inspire, politics to mobilize, ambition to elevate himself just enough above the grief to remind the audience that he was still a player, still a contender, still relevant, And yet, as he leaned into the rhetoric, a subtle unease rippled through the hall. Because grief, real grief, does not sell itself. It spills out raw, unfiltered. And what Rubio offered instead was packaged asterisk. The contradiction tightened with every sentence. His words praised sacrifice, but his tone suggested calculation. He honored Charlie Kirk as a man of conviction, yet revealed himself as a man guided by the optics of conviction. And in that collision of image and reality, the audience began to sense the truth. Rubio wanted to own the stage, to inherit Kirk's mantle of influence, but in his very effort, he revealed just how distant he was from the fire that had once made Kirk irresistible to his followers. He closed with a line meant to echo gravitas. Charlie's fight is now our fight, and we will not rest until his vision for America is fulfilled. The applause came, respectful but restrained, more an act of politeness than passion. Rubio smiled faintly, adjusted his papers, and stepped back, satisfied that he had hit the marks he came to hit. But the room told a different story. Conversations whispered, eyes glanced toward the next speaker, and an energy of anticipation rose again. Rubio had spoken, yes, but he had not moved them. He had left them thoughtful, perhaps, but not stirred. And in a memorial where emotion ran deeper than politics, his performance had drawn its own kind of silence. He wanted to own the stage, but instead revealed the cracks beneath the surface. Tulsi Gabbard was not a stranger to standing alone. From her earliest years in Hawaii, she carried with her the rhythms of island life, family, service, faith, but also the weight of being different. She was not molded in the factories of Washington politics, nor did she rise from a carefully engineered path paved with donors and consultants. Tulsi's life was shaped instead by choices that demanded sacrifice. Putting on a uniform, deploying to war, and confronting truths that most politicians only read about in briefing books. Her story began with service. Long before she ever stepped onto a debate stage or into the halls of Congress, as a teenager, she already felt the pull of responsibility toward others. That calling led her not into lobbying firms or think tanks, but into the Army National Guard. She traded the comforts of privilege for fatigues, boots, and the dirt of training grounds. When the wars came, she did not watch from the safety of committee hearings. She went. 2 deployments, one to Iraq, one to Kuwait, carved scars into her memory that no speech could fully capture. She tended to soldiers whose lives were shattered, witnessed the costs of decisions made by men in suits thousands of miles away, and carried those stories home in silence. It was this silence that marked her even years later. In politics, everyone talks. Tulsi often chose instead to listen. When she did speak, her words came with the weight of someone who knew what it meant to bleed for the flag she carried. She was not rehearsed. She was raw, not polished, but precise. Her independence became both her greatest strength and her most controversial trait. Elected to Congress as a Democrat. She quickly proved unwilling to play by the rules of her party. When she saw corruption, she called it out. When she saw leaders chasing ambition over service, she refused to bend. She clashed with party elites, walked away from positions of influence, and accepted the backlash that followed. Tulsi was not trying to be liked. She was trying to be honest. In an age of partisan machinery where every move was scripted, she broke the script. That defiance drew attacks. Critics branded her unpredictable, disloyal, even dangerous. But it also drew admiration, especially from those tired of politics as usual. Veterans recognized her authenticity. Immigrants heard in her story a resonance of sacrifice and struggle, of carving out dignity in a system that often seemed rigged against outsiders. Young people saw a leader unafraid to defy the currents of her own party. A reminder that independence was not only possible, but necessary. Asterisk, her scars were not just political. The weight of war had followed her home. Friends she had served with were gone. Others carried invisible wounds. Tulsi herself spoke candidly of the cost of the sleepless nights, of the images burned into memory, of the resilience it demanded simply to keep going. She did not hide those scars. She wore them as reminders. Reminders that leadership is not about sound bites, but about responsibility. Not about ambition, but about sacrifice. Asterisk. And so when she stepped into the memorial hall that day, Tulsi carried with her not only the uniform of a soldier and the history of a congresswoman, but the bearing of someone who had already endured storms. She did not arrive with the polished swagger of Marco Rubio or the fiery television-ready cadence of Pete Hegseth. She arrived with calm. That calm unnerved some, inspired others, and drew every eye without demanding it. Asterisk, as she waited her turn at the podium, Tulsi did not shuffle papers or adjust her suit. She stood still, her gaze steady on Charlie Kirk's portrait. For all their differences, she understood the magnitude of the moment. Kirk had been a fighter in his own way. His absence had left a vacuum, and into that vacuum, every speaker on that stage hoped to project their version of the future. Asterisk, but Tulsi was different. She had no machine behind her, no calculation dictating every syllable. What she had instead was experience, lived, felt, and earned. Her military service, her willingness to break ranks, her insistence on truth even when it cost her allies, all of it formed the foundation of what she was about to say. Asterisk. The audience did not know it yet. But Tulsi's presence was about to shift the atmosphere of the memorial. For all of Rubio's polish and Hegseth's fire, it was Tulsi's calm defiance. Her refusal to bend to the script that would leave the room transformed. Because unlike them, she did not come merely to honor a man or to advance a cause. She came to speak truth. Asterisk. It was this journey, the deployments, the betrayals, the scars, the courage to defy the powerful that prepared her for the moment she stunned the crowd. Asterisk. The podium had already felt the weight of Marco Rubio's words. Words crafted with the precision of a man who had lived his entire career in front of cameras. His tribute had been polished, deliberate, and carefully layered with scripture and sound bites. It carried the hallmarks of a statesman, but not the heartbeat of a friend. The applause he received was respectful, but thin, more a ritual than a roar. As Rubio stepped back, eyes glancing toward the cameras as if to confirm they had caught his best angles, the audience seemed restless, hungry for something more real. Asterisk, then came Pete Hegseth. He approached the podium with a different kind of energy, the energy of a soldier ready for battle. It's not a politician positioning for headlines. His stance was wide, his jaw tight, his voice already resonant before he even touched the microphone. Asterisk, Charlie Kirk was a fighter? Hegseth began, his tone carrying both conviction and command. He didn't just stand up for what he believed in. He charged into the fire, knowing the fire was real. He knew there were consequences. He knew the other side would come after him, smear him, try to destroy him, and he stood anyway. Asterisk, the words hit harder than Rubio's polished phrases because they were raw, even imperfect. Hegseth didn't polish. He punched. His cadence rose and fell with the rhythm of a rally more than a memorial, his hands slamming the podium at points to underline his declarations. He spoke as though Kirk were not gone, but present, as though the man's spirit still marched among the crowd, daring them to pick up the fight he had left unfinished. Asterisk, Charlie didn't believe in half measures, Hegseth thundered. And if we're here today to honor him, then let's be honest. Honoring him means carrying that fight forward, against the elites, against the lies, against every single thing that would steal this country from us. Asterisk, the applause was louder now. Sharper, tinged with adrenaline. Veterans in the room nodded. Younger activists clapped hard, some even rising to their feet. The energy was undeniable, but so too was the sense that grief had been fused with politics, in a way that blurred the line between remembrance and rallying cry. For some, it was inspiring. For others, it was jarring. But no one could deny that Hegseth's fire had moved the room in a way Rubio's polish had not. Asterisk as Hegseth concluded. His final words echoed like a drumbeat. Charlie's voice is gone. Ours cannot be. Pick up his torch and carry it higher than ever before. The applause came again, rolling through the hall like a wave. Hegseth stepped back, chest heaving, face set in the steel of conviction. Asterisk, but as the clapping died down, the air shifted. The energy of fire had filled the room, but fire leaves smoke. What lingered was not calm, not reflection, but restlessness. It was in that unsettled silence that Tulsi Gabbard rose. Asterisk, there was no rush in her step, no hunger for the spotlight, no theatrics in her movement. She walked with measured grace, her hands steady at her sides, her eyes forward but soft. While Rubio had brought polish and Hegseth had brought fury, Tulsi brought something else entirely, a presence that commanded without demanding. Asterisk. The audience noticed immediately. Conversations hushed. Chairs shifted quietly. Even the cameras, which had clicked incessantly during Rubio and Hegseth, seemed to pause, their operators drawn into the moment. Tulsi reached the podium, and for a long second, she didn't speak. She simply looked at the crowd, then at Kirk's portrait, as though offering a silent prayer. Asterisk, and in that pause, the tension of contrast became undeniable. Rubio had delivered performance. Hegseth had delivered passion. But Tulsi, with nothing yet spoken, radiated dignity. Asterisk, and then Tulsi stepped forward. And the room fell silent. Asterisk, asterisk. For a moment, there was only silence. Tulsi Gabbard's hands rested lightly on the edges of the podium, her posture relaxed, yet unshakable. Her gaze fixed on the audience with the steadiness of someone who had looked war in the eye and never blinked. She didn't rush. She didn't shuffle papers or clear her throat. She simply waited long enough for the restless murmurs to fade, long enough for the last cough to die out. Long enough for the entire hall to realize that she commanded the room without a single word. Asterisk, when she finally spoke. Her voice was steady, low, and deliberate. Asterisk, I did not know Charlie as well as some here, she began, her tone calm and without theatrics. But I know what it means to serve. I know what it means to sacrifice. And I know that behind every life lived in service of something greater. There are people left behind who must carry that burden forward. Asterisk, the words were not fireworks. They were something deeper, something weightier. The crowd leaned in. Veterans straightened in their seats. Young students, phones lowered for once, stilled their fidgeting. Tulsi's voice carried not the performance of grief, but the authenticity of it. Asterisk, she paused, letting the silence breathe again. The cameras caught Rubio shifting in his seat, his smile frozen but brittle. Hegseth, meanwhile, leaned slightly forward. His eyes locked on Tulsi, as though recognizing the difference between rhetoric and truth. Asterisk. Charlie Kirk, Tulsi continued, believed in standing firm. Some agreed with him, some didn't. That's the reality of a free country. But what mattered most was that he was willing to take the hits. He was willing to be misunderstood, even hated, if it meant fighting for what he believed was right. That willingness, that courage, is rare. Asterisk, the audience murmured, nodding. A few wiped their eyes. Tulsi allowed another pause, her hand briefly brushing the edge of the microphone before she drew it back, resisting any temptation to dramatize. Her restraint itself was the drama. Asterisk, I have worn the uniform of this nation, she said, her tone sharpening now. I have stood beside men and women who gave everything, and I have carried their memory long after the battle ended. And I will tell you this, when you have seen life stripped to its most fragile, you have seen blood in the dirt, you realize something that politics often forgets. Dignity matters. Service matters. Unity matters. Asterisk, the words struck like a hammer against the polished veneer of Rubio's speech. The room grew heavier. The silence charged. A veteran in the back bowed his head, hand clenching the program on his lap. A young woman near the front wiped her cheek, embarrassed by her tears but unable to hold them back. Asterisk, Tulsi pressed forward. It is easy to divide. Easy to point fingers, to declare enemies, to score points. But it is hard. Much harder to look someone in the eye, someone who disagrees with you, and still see their humanity, still see their worth, still see that they, too, are children of God. Asterisk, Rubio's jaw tightened. The cameras caught him glancing briefly at the floor, his discomfort undeniable. Hegseth, however, gave a small nod, his lips tightening as though conceding that even fire had to bow to truth. Asterisk, Tulsi's voice softened, but carried further for it. Charlie's legacy will not be measured by the headlines he made, but by the courage he gave to others. And courage is not partisan. Courage belongs to all who are willing to risk comfort for conviction, willing to stand for their neighbor, willing to sacrifice for something greater than themselves. Asterisk, applause began, hesitant at first, then swelling. Tulsi raised a hand gently, almost embarrassed by it, and the room quieted again. She wanted them not to clap, but to listen. Asterisk, we live in a time, she continued, where too many chase power instead of service, where too many see politics as a game instead of a duty. And in moments like this, at a memorial like this, we must ask ourselves, who are we really? Are we here to posture, or are we here to remember what truly matters? Asterisk, her eyes swept across the audience, steady, searching. Because when the cameras leave, when the lights dim, and when all of this fades, what remains is not the applause we win or the headlines we write. What remains is the measure of our integrity. And integrity means standing up for what is right, even when it costs us. Integrity means refusing to bow to party bosses, to donors, to machines that want to control us. Integrity means living with dignity, even when dignity is inconvenient. Asterisk, the hall was still now, the kind of stillness that comes only when words pierce deep. No shifting chairs, no coughs. Not even the whir of cameras dared intrude. Tulsi's voice lowered to almost a whisper. Asterisk, I am not here to score points. I am not here to posture. I am here because a man who believed in courage is gone, and it is now on us to decide whether we will honor him with more of the same, or whether we will be braver. Asterisk for a moment. Then the applause erupted. Not polite, not ritual, but full-bodied, rising, thunderous. The crowd stood, some clapping, some crying, some doing both at once. Veterans saluted. Students cheered. Even those who disagreed with her politics felt compelled to rise, pulled not by agreement but by respect. Asterisk, the cameras found Rubio, his face taut, his hands clapping too slowly, too deliberately. They found Hegseth, nodding firmly, his expression hard but respectful, as though admitting Tulsi had spoken a truth that even his fire could not match. They found the audience rising as one, the sound shaking the hall. Asterisk, Tulsi waited. She did not bask. She let the applause crest and fade, her hands resting once again on the podium. She took one last breath, steady and sure, and delivered her closing line. Asterisk, let us leave here today remembering that dignity will always outlast division, and that service will always outshine ambition. Asterisk, the words seemed to hang in the air, suspended, heavy with finality. Asterisk, her final line would echo far beyond the walls of the memorial. Asterisk. The moment Tulsi stepped down from the podium, the memorial hall seemed forever changed. People rose from their seats, still buzzing with the resonance of her words, some lingering in the aisles, others rushing toward the exits. Already pulling out their phones. Within minutes, clips of her speech began hitting social media feeds. By the time the last prayer was spoken, the digital tide had already formed into a wave. Asterisk on Twitter. A clip of her line about dignity over division shot past 500,000 views in under an hour. This is what leadership looks like. Read one caption. paired with a side-by-side video comparing Tulsi's calm poise to Rubio's stiff, polished delivery. On Instagram, Reels layered her words over images of American soldiers, families at rallies, and even Charlie Kirk himself. TikTok stitched her steady pauses with text overlays declaring, "The moment politics cracked open, *hashtag surged, #dignity over division, #TULSI, truth, #leadership, not ambition." They rose so fast that even mainstream outlets had to acknowledge them, flashing across chyrons as anchors scrambled to frame what had just happened. Commentators split sharply. On conservative talk shows, some hosts praised Hegseth's raw patriotism, but admitted Tulsi had carried the weight of the day. Others tried to downplay her impact, framing her speech as opportunism. But their denial was drowned out by the sheer velocity of ordinary people sharing, liking, reposting. Progressives marveled at her ability to transcend partisanship. Veterans called in to radio shows, their voices thick with emotion. "She gets it," one Marine said. "She knows what sacrifice really means." Even those far removed from politics felt it. A teacher in Chicago posted, "My students are talking about this speech. Not about politics, not about parties, about courage." That says something. A college freshman uploaded a video in tears. "I didn't even like Charlie Kirk, but tonight, I feel like maybe there's still something worth believing in." Memes exploded. The internet's new form of scripture. One showed Rubio rehearsing in front of a mirror, Tulsi standing in a field uniform beside him. Caption, "One practiced. One lived it." Another froze Hegseth mid-salute, overlaying the words, "Even the soldier knew when truth spoke." The contrast became undeniable. Rubio, the polished politician. Hegseth, the fiery loyalist. Tulsi, the truth-teller. ****. Cable news seized on the drama. Panels replayed her final line again and again, some pundits calling it the sentence that might outlive the event itself. One analyst framed it bluntly. Tulsi spoke for America. Rubio spoke for himself. The soundbite stuck, repeated in headlines, tweets, and even late-night comedy sketches. But the real electricity wasn't in the media echo chamber. It was among ordinary people. Veterans groups organized threads sharing their own stories of sacrifice. Families lit candles at home, posting pictures under the hashtag for dignity. College students who had never tuned into a memorial before now debated the meaning of leadership, the role of courage, the hunger for something beyond partisan games. The surge was more than numbers. It was validation. For immigrants who had long felt invisible, Tulsi's insistence on dignity resonated like a promise. For progressives weary of cynicism, her refusal to bow to party machinery was vindication. For conservatives quietly disillusioned, her words felt like a bridge to something purer, something less hollow than the spectacle they had just witnessed. By nightfall, the speech had gone global. International outlets translated her words, framing them as evidence that America still had voices willing to rise above division. Clips subtitled in Spanish, French, and Hindi went viral abroad, carrying the echo far beyond U.S. borders. And yet, amid the trending hashtags and emotional testimonies, there lingered a deeper tension, one that wasn't captured on camera, one that hadn't yet spilled onto feeds. For those who had been in the hall, for those who had seen the faces of the political operatives clustered in the shadows, there was an awareness that something else had shifted. The applause had ended. The cameras had dimmed. But the conversations behind closed doors were only just beginning. Because what happened after the cameras turned off revealed the deepest shock of all. By the following morning, headlines still carried the names of Rubio, Hegseth, Tulsi. Clips still ricocheted across timelines. But as the echoes of the memorial settled, a deeper truth emerged, one that transcended the speeches, the applause, and even the controversy. This gathering, framed in grief, had revealed something larger than any single figure on that stage. It was not ultimately about Rubio's polish, Hegseth's fire, or even Tulsi's quiet thunder. It was about the meaning of Charlie Kirk's legacy and what America chooses to carry forward from it. Asterisk. Charlie Kirk had built his career on conviction. Whether one agreed or disagreed with his politics, no one could deny the ferocity with which he pursued what he believed. His life was a reminder that movements are never built on silence, but on the voices of those willing to risk being heard. And yet, the memorial revealed an even greater legacy, that ideas are always bigger than the person who carries them. Asterisk in that hall. 3 speakers embodied 3 paths: ambition polished into performance, fire forged into loyalty, and dignity rooted in sacrifice. The audience, and indeed the country, witnessed those contrasts in real time, and they chose which one resonated deepest. Asterisk, because in the end, it wasn't Rubio's carefully rehearsed cadence that lingered. It wasn't Hegseth's pounding fists. It was Tulsi's stillness, her steady insistence that service mattered more than rhetoric. That courage was not a soundbite, but a lived reality. That dignity, even when quiet, outlasts ambition. Asterisk, the lesson was larger than politics. It was about America itself, about whether this country will continue to reward spectacle over substance, or whether it can return to something truer, a place where the measure of a leader is not the sharpness of their ambition, but the depth of their service. Asterisk. Why, as one commentator wrote the next day, the memorial was not about death, it was about the rebirth of courage. And perhaps that is the truest reflection, because courage is what the moment demanded. And courage is what echoed far beyond those walls. Asterisk for the immigrant family watching in their living room. Courage meant teaching their children that dignity is never negotiable. For the veterans scrolling through clips, courage meant remembering that service doesn't end with the uniform. It lives on in how we defend truth. For young people across the country, courage meant believing that leadership could still look like humility, steadiness, and integrity. Asterisk this, then, is the universal takeaway. When ambition collides with dignity, when fire collides with service, only one endures. Rhetoric fades. Performances are forgotten. But the quiet power of truth, carried with grace, leaves its mark on history. Asterisk, and so the memorial became something else entirely. A reminder, a warning, an invitation. A reminder that America's story is never written in the performances of its politicians, but in the courage of those willing to speak from the heart. A warning that division and spectacle will always tempt us, but cannot sustain us. And an invitation to each of us to live with dignity, to choose service over ego, and to find in ourselves the courage to carry the torch higher. Asterisk if you felt that truth in Tulsi's words. If you felt the tremor of possibility in that hall, then carry it forward. In your own life, in your family, in your community, stand for dignity when it's easier to stay silent. Stand for justice when it costs you something. Stand for unity when division is the easier sell. Asterisk because, in the end, this story was never just about Charlie Kirk or Rubio or Hegseth or Tulsi. It was about us, about America. About the courage we choose to carry or let die. Asterisk, and now, the choice is yours. Asterisk, asterisk.